In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Direct, O Lord, all our actions by thy holy inspirations, and carry them on by thy gracious assistance, so that every prayer and work of ours may begin from thee and by thee, be happening through Christ our Lord. Amen. Virgin most powerful, pray for us. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Tonight, the topic of the conference is basically going to be demonology, how demons function, their psychology, how we're starting to see that in our current culture, and how to combat it, because this is something that we're all dealing with on various levels. Everybody is. I don't think it takes too much for me just to say you just have to watch the politicians for a little while and you know we're dealing with demons. Okay. So, the first thing we want to do, though, is talk a little bit about the creation of the angels and how their psychology became established. So, when God created the hierarchy of angels, he created the entire hierarchy of angels, which is billions upon billions of angels. So if you think about it, every single one of us and every single human being that's ever existed had a guardian angel. So just at the level of angel, and that's only one part of that choir, there's 20 billion angels, I think, just in that choir. So, and that doesn't include all the other angels that were created. So the totality of all the 9 choirs were all created instantaneously at once. The angels were then created. When they were created, their way of knowing, or it's called the mode of knowing, how they understand things is fundamentally different from us. In fact, it's the exact opposite. So with us, we come into contact with a variety of different things. We see a number of different dogs, and then from that, we're able to abstract the idea of what a dog is, and then we can make a judgment about dogs are 4-footed, etc. So for us, in order to get a conceptual knowledge of something, we actually have to come into contact with things for a little while. So it takes us a while to actually come to understand certain things. Where the angels were different. So when they were created, St. Thomas says that it's called the 3 instances. So the first instance is when they were created, God created them into a complete act of knowing. Now, when we say complete, it means complete. It meant they knew who God was, who they were, what their nature was, what their assigned task was, what their relationship was in relation to all the other angels, what would happen if they did not accept their task. What would happen if they were faithful, that they would have the beatific vision. St. Thomas also said they had the virtue gifts, or they had the infused virtues of faith, hope, and charity, which means they also had knowledge of the incarnation and the blessed Trinity. So they knew Christ was going to become God, or I should say God was going to become man. So when that, this is one of the reasons why we see in Scripture the angels were very often, they're the demons, they're at first, they can't figure out if this is the guy, right? So they're asking Christ, they're testing him, and they're trying to see what's going on, and they're not really sure if this is him, but it's after he starts doing miracles on a regular basis that they realize this is it. It has to be him, because only man who become God, it could explain this kind of a thing, right? 2, one of the things that they noticed is that Christ, unlike even the prophets and the givers of the law, Christ had perfect coercive power over demons. I'm going to circle around to that back towards a little bit later. And that meant that any time he just told them, you're out, boom, they were out. So they knew when he gave a command that it was actually coming from God, the second person of the Trinity, and so they knew they had to obey. So this full and complete act of knowledge meant then, St. Thomas says, they get this act of knowledge, and then he says there's a concomitant delight in the will. So the first time they see the beauty of God's plan, instantaneously they fully comprehend it to the degree that they're capable of. He said there was delight. And even demons, when you have them in session, you can hammer them and force them to think of that delight of their first instance, and it causes them tremendous pain. The second instance is then they made their choice, whether they're going to actually accept their assigned task or not. And if they accepted their assigned task, then in the third instance, St. Thomas says, then God, there's no reason for delay in reward or punishment. So instantaneously, they got to see the beatific vision if they were faithful to him. Now, we're going to talk about a little bit what that fall included. Whereas the demons, when they rejected their assigned task, that meant they were immediately damned. And so they had an immediate experience of God's judgment and the fact that they had failed, and that they immediately experienced the pain of loss, which is what it's like to be in hell. There's actually 13 different forms of suffering that they suffer That's one of them. Pain of conscience, the fact that they still have natural law inclinations. So God, each angel has its own natural law. So we talk about human beings having a natural law. So we have a natural law, but it's also to have a life of reason. So actually, part of being a human being is having an inclination towards government. Not quite the size we have, and not the way it's behaving, but we do actually have that. We have an inclination to pursue the truth, that God is to be obeyed, etc. So we have the inclination of the natural law. The angels also were given, each angel is its own species. Their personalities, you see this when you're in session and different demons are possessing, and one will come to the surface and the other one leaves. For a while, their personalities are far more distinct than human personalities. Their characteristics are far more pronounced. You can see that their natural inclinations are to very definitive, distinct things, because that's what God inclined them to. So their assigned task is part of their natural law. They still have a desire to fulfill that natural law inclination. It would be analogous to us, because when we get hungry, we have a desire, we have an inclination to eat. But if we had chosen, no, I'm never going to eat, and we're starving, it's kind of like, I've made this decision, I'm not going to eat, but I'm starving. That's basically the way they are. But their suffering is far more intense because their natural inclinations are far clearer than ours. Because they had an assigned task, if they reject, that task is who they are. It's who they are. It's why God made them. It determines their personality. The perfections that they have of their personality all revolve around that assigned task. So when they reject the assigned task, as the demons did, it meant that it was a perfect act of self-hatred. This is one of the reasons why they literally chose to hate themselves. Which is why when we see it starting to replicate in human beings, that self-hatred, that self-loathing, I tell people you have to stop it. First of all, it's against charity. But the second thing is that that's the type of psychology that demons try and replicate in us. Every single one of us, if you have any spiritual defect whatsoever, which is all of you, by the way, if you have any spiritual defect whatsoever, that means there is some area in your psychology that the demons have been spending your life trying to build a psychological compatibility with. They start tempting you to get you to do certain things so that you become easier to manipulate. And this is one of the reasons why you have to overcome any defects. But self-loathing and self-hatred and that desire to hurt ourselves, that all comes from, that's their psychology. They have a perfect self-hatred. But the other part of it is their test was this. So when they were created, they saw themselves and who and what they are, but they also, I mentioned that they saw the relationship with all the other angels and stuff, and so they saw in the other angels and saints that would eventually exist that there was this perfection that was above them, but wasn't proper to their nature, and so they could never have it because the angels can't change in their nature, and so there was this perfection, and so they had to make a choice of sacrifice. They had to be willing to sacrifice this good that they perceived, and if they were willing to sacrifice that and accept their assigned task, then that meant that God would reward them with the beatific vision. If they didn't and they chose, no, I still want that thing, then if they did that, then they were damned. Now what that essentially means is two things. Literally, demons chose a figment of their imagination, something they knew they would never have, over the beatific vision of God. At one point I said to one demon, I said, that's irrational. And he just looks at me and says, yeah. That gives you an indicator of it. But it also meant that they still want that thing, and that's part of what drives their psychology. But it also meant that they failed God, and so they have this sense of failure. You see this among certain human beings, you just have something like, you got to stop that too, right? But they also, that thing that they wanted and the sin and the fact that they were inclined towards a very specific kind of task meant that there were different angels that were assigned tasks primarily to help us or to do administration, if you're talking about the middle rank, to do administration in relationship to the other angels. And then the people at the top, the angels at the top were primarily created for God. And then the lower rank was created for us. But there's always a certain sense in which there is a kind of there's a task to which they're assigned. Once they chose to not accept their task, that meant that their will was inclined to negating that task anywhere they found it. So let me give you an example. The demon Loki, yeah, it's a real demon. The demon Loki, his original assigned task, because I had him in one case, was to inspire people to enter into religious life and to become priests. His primary job was to foster vocations. His thing is that he actually, his function that he performs now in relationship to Satan, serving Satan, is that he actually seeks to derail vocations by getting men and women to become worldly, which we're seeing across the board. This guy's phenomenally successful. So that's just one example. Another example is that we talk about Lucifer. Now, Lucifer comes from the two Latin words, lux ferre, which means to bear light, right? Which basically means that that his principal function was something on the intellectual level. At a certain point, I managed to beat out of him because I've had him in 3 different cases. And he basically said that his originally assigned task was to enlighten the mind of Our Lady. So that's why he was called Lucifer. That was his primary assigned task, was to enlighten the mind of Our Lady to make her even more sacrificial than she was. He said when he saw her, because in his first instance, everything that was necessary for them in order to choose their task, each angel saw, this is what my task is, and it revolves around everything necessary to make my choice, they saw. And in this, he saw the interior beauty of Our Lady. He said her interior life was so absolutely beautiful that he knew he would always be second best. And that's the beauty that he wanted. So at a certain point I said to him, well, because he was beefing about the title of Our Lady, Mirror of Justice. I said, so really what you saw in him in her was him, wasn't it? Now that's it's a very formal way for an exorcist to tell the demons, you're talking about God. You saw she was the perfect, in her interior life, she was the perfect mirror image of God. And he said, yes, that's why I wanted to be God. Not because of the power, not to subvert his thing, because I wanted his beauty for myself. Which is interesting, because one of his assigned tasks was music. Actually, that God gave him a sense of beauty, and this is one of the reasons why the music we see today is becoming very appetitive and very vile, right? But his secondary assigned task was to enlighten our minds to make us more sacrificial than we actually are. St. Thomas says, St. Thomas is one of those guys that he'll make these offhanded comments in the Summa Theologia. He'll just say, something like, well, the totality of the spiritual life ultimately revolves around a person being willing to sacrifice their will to his. And he just throws it out there like it's nothing, and it's like the totality of the spiritual life, right? But that's actually true. When Lucifer saw Our Lady, so I'm trying to give you a sense of their psychology. As I mentioned, their personalities are very distinct. And they have their psychological patterns. They have patterns of thinking, just like we do. And so what happened is that he got angry with God because he basically revealed something about Our Lady. Now, you might have heard me talk about this in another conference if you've listened to them online, but he said that her entire life, Our Lady sacrificed herself over and over again and never once counted the personal cost. That's why she is different from every single individual in this room. She is not like us. We are not like her in that respect. It's true that she's human, but by the grace of God, she never once counted the personal cost that she would have if she did something that was going to be painful or difficult or what have you. And then he said, and it wasn't just that, it was the perpetuity of her sacrifice. Her whole life, over and over and over again, she sacrificed herself again, never taking her own good, never taking herself into the calculus, but purely doing it because, as one of the other possessors said, When she saw how good God was, she gave herself entirely to him. When he found out that his job was to make her even more sacrificial, which meant her interior beauty was going to be even greater by his help, he said he would have nothing to do with it. And so he said he spat on God because he wasn't going to accept that. So this gives us an indicator. Now, there's something that's very important in that. It means that when angels make a decision, they're all in. They're either in or they're out. There's none of this half-baked stuff. See, as human beings, because we're pretty dumb, when we make a decision, it's not real wholehearted, right? I mean, we like, oh, I'll do this. Oh, that wasn't good. And then we later change our mind, right? And when we make a choice, free choice is basically the choosing between goods, and what we're doing is we're determining our will, we're directing our will to a particular thing, so we're making a determination. But that determination is by degree. St. Thomas says initially there's an inchoate habit there, an inclination, so that when we make a choice, the next time we make that choice, there's a little bit of an inclination. And the more we make that choice, the more our will becomes fixed in something. This is why people who lead a good life and keep trying to pursue the good, it just becomes, that's their goal. That's what they want. They're not interested in evil, that's their goal. But we also see the same thing in relationship to politicians and evil people. I'm not equating them, by the way. Okay. This is why you look at some of these people, and one of the psychological patterns that you see that is, we call it a secondary sign of possession, but it's not necessarily possession, but it's a pattern of thinking that you see in demons, is malice. When you see someone, I tell people, okay, just bear with me. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, again, bear with me, just for the sake of argument, we elect a bumbling idiot to the presidency. Now, just bear with me. I know it just seems ridiculous, but just bear with me. Even an idiot bumbles around upon the right thing to do once in a while, but when everything that is done maximizes damage to the degree that they're capable of, that's called malice. Right? And this is something that we're actually dealing with. That when consistently, every time you turn around, our country's getting hammered on every single level, on every single thing, doesn't matter what it is, that's malice. And that's what demons have, because when they make a choice, it's a different matter. With human beings, it takes a while to get to the point where our will becomes fixed in something. In fact, it doesn't become fully fixed until we die, and then God fixes it for us, in the good or the evil, depending on whether we're in the state of grace or not. But as far as angels, it's all in, because they have absolutely perfect comprehension of exactly what they're choosing. When they make a choice, their will becomes perfectly fixed in that evil, right? And so that's their patterns of thinking. Today, I know there's a resurfacing of a particular heresy. It's called apokatastasis is the name of the heresy. It was formally condemned by the Council of Constantinople, and it's this idea that in the end the demons might be rehabilitated, that the people in hell might still get to go to heaven. That has been formally condemned by the church. You cannot consider yourself a Catholic and believe that. Okay. This means that their punishment is forever, and they know it. In session, one of the things that you beat them up and it really causes them a lot of pain is you just draw out some point of the thing that they're suffering, and then you tell them this is going to last forever. Forever. This will never change for you, never. And it just takes them down, right? So the point being is that their will is fixed in evil. Okay. So this means that certain demons are just going to afflict on some people than others. So very often, which demon is possessing an individual is based upon the inversion of his assigned task. So and that means that there's certain demons for certain kinds of disorders. So the demon of impurity is Beelzebub, but also Baal is a demon of impurity. Asmodeus is a demon of impurity. There's a number of them that are underneath it that are demons of impurity. But they actually they're specific things. So, for example, we see this from time to time, if someone shows up on our doorstep, if it's a male who has homosexual tendencies and he's possessed, it's sure money it's Asmodeus, because he's the guy that's driving it. And that tells you that the demons are picking at these people and driving certain psychological behaviors. Demons, okay, so with us, I started out talking about how the fact that we come in contact with a number of different things, and from that we abstract a kind of universal knowledge. So I see a bunch of dogs, And then eventually I understand what a dog is conceptually. Angels are the exact opposite. When their mode of knowing is the opposite of that. So the first thing that they understand is the concept, the conceptual knowledge. When they were created, God infused in them the totality of all of the natures and all the concepts of everything that would ever exist. So boom, all at once they have this perfect comprehension of everything. So all they need to do to know what a tree is just think of a tree and boom, they instantaneously exhaust to the degree that their intellect can what a tree is. This is true about human beings. All they have to do is think of what a human being is. They know every single faculty. They know exactly how it works. They know how DNA works. They know how disposition works, the DNA connected to the disposition. They actually know how our appetites and emotions work. They know how the interrelations of the various faculties. They also know, just by looking at and they also know the various kinds of causes and things perfectly, so they know causes. This is how Nostradamus was able to use divination or sorcery in order to figure out a large amount of stuff that was actually going to happen, because of the fact that the demons can look at the state of things and then they know the nature of causes, and so they know where these things are headed, right? It's analogous to, I tell people, we have a certain knowledge of that as human beings, just not quite on that level. So, and this is the example I always use. If I throw a midget off the top of a building, I know by the nature of gravity he's going to hit the ground, right? Well, it's the same thing in relationship to them, except with them, they can look at super complex states of things and know the nature of causes and know where they're generally headed. This is one of the reasons why I said recently that they know their time is coming up. They know it's short because certain things are starting to fall in place that they've seen in the past, that anytime this happens, God pulls the plug on it, right? And so that's when he just said, that's enough, and he pulled the plug on it. So the demons are seeing all this, they're like, it can't be much longer, right? The other thing is that with demons, so they first were given this perfect conceptual knowledge, which they never lose, which puts us at an extreme advantage because they're so intelligent, they're so knowledgeable, they know exactly the stuff, they know exactly how things work, etc. This is one of the reasons actually you can do a diagnostic in possession, because sometimes they'll say things, they'll make theological distinctions that there's no way this person could know, right? And so that's one of the ways that you actually know it. But their mode of knowing, they start with the concept, and the way they understand a particular thing is they just take their will, because they only have intellect and will. They don't have emotions and a body and all that. They just have intellect and will. All they have to do is think of the concept and then look at a particular instance inside the concept, and that's how they can know you. Their knowledge of you, the knowledge of all particular things as they've happened from the beginning of history until now, have been infused in their intellects as it happens. They literally know every single material thing that's happening in the entire universe all the time. It just means they have to focus on particular things. So if they want to watch you, all they have to do is look at you in their concept, and they know. And they've been watching you, by the way, not to make you paranoid. Although they do say you're not paranoid if they are following you and watching you. But the point being is, but they're very limited. God restricts them and limits their ability to affect us, but it doesn't mean they're not watching us. And they're watching us very closely because they're watching our patterns. They're watching our patterns for three things. One is they just want to watch. They already know by our DNA what our proclivities are likely to be, what our dispositions, what our inclinations to specific vices are going to be, and things of that sort, just by looking at our DNA. But then they also watch our patterns of behavior so that they know likely they have a pretty good idea of what virtues and vices you have, what your spiritual weaknesses are, what your spiritual strengths are. The other thing they're watching for are the external manifestations of grace that God is giving you internally, so that they can kind of map that, engage that, and take that into consideration of the spiritual warfare. They also have infused knowledge of warfare, which means and because they have a perfect knowledge of human nature, and because they have a perfect knowledge of spiritual warfare, and because they've been watching you for decades, they know the precise strategy that they can use to take you out, God permitting. This is something to keep in mind. We're not talking about a normal situation here. The thing is like I said, they're watching us, but you have to understand that God regulates every single thing they do. See, we got this idea, which is false, that demons get to maraud around and go do whatever they want. That's not true. Literally, what temptation, when they can tempt you, the degree of the temptation, the content of the temptation is entirely determined by God, entirely. Even in cases of possession, who can possess, to the degrees of possession, because possessions are by degrees. What kinds of manifestation, how long the possession is going to last, what's going to get them out, what parts of the body they can possess, when they can manifest, when they can't manifest. The degree of the individual manifestations are entirely determined by God. They are on an extraordinarily short leash. Demons are phenomenally consistent for three reasons. One is they have a nature that has not changed, and so they're going to behave according to their nature. Second, their sin fixes them in a certain also set of behaviors, so they're going to act consistent with that. Third, God regulates them and doesn't permit them to do anything without it being for our spiritual benefit in some sense. This is why demons, even in possession cases, will admit that they are the instruments of sanctification of the person who's possessed. Some of the holiest people I know were possessed or are possessed. I knew a woman that actually reached the 4th level of prayer and started having mystical contemplation just as the possession broke. That's 4 levels. She managed to get up 4 levels. There's 9. Most people never get past the 2nd. And then one of the cases that I'm working with now, she's possessed by Beelzebub, which is the demon of impurity, and I've seen her go 6 months without committing venial sin. She took a vow of chastity 14 years ago once the possession was outed, and she's never once violated it. And so he has become the instrument of her sanctification. She's becoming one of the most, if there's any person that I can say that has the true virtue of virtue of mortification, that willingness to suffer, it's her. And so God uses them. Usually possessed people will say, well, I'm glad I got out of this what I got out of this, but I don't think I'd want to be possessed again. Right? But this tells us, okay, so that's just how demons function psychologically. And each time you get a different demon, and you can just see by their patterns of thinking that their characteristics are different. Like I said, their personalities are very different. So with us, temptation comes from 3 sources: the world, the flesh, and the devil. And the world only acts upon the flesh, and the devils can only act upon on the world or the flesh in order to tempt us. So it all hinges upon the flesh. But the point being is that, so demons are not the cause of every form of temptation. But they do know the principal way that they tempt us, the saints say, is by introducing things into our imagination. And they know from our patterns what we are likely to fall to in relationship to temptation. And so if you notice that you're struggling in a specific area, as I mentioned before, that means that the demon that drives certain kinds of things, so let's say extreme anger. Extreme anger is the domain of the demon Isis. And the reason it's his domain is because Isis, his fall was precipitated by the fact that he refused to accept Christ's mercy for men. And as a result of that, he became the most cruel, vicious demon you ever have to deal with. He's even worse than Satan in a certain sense. Satan has his own set of characteristics that you have to deal with. But this guy is just cruel and vicious. But that tells you that he drives these particular things. And as you begin to have a vice, you start building this compatibility with the demon, and you become easily manipulatable. So one of the things that you can do is you can, start to actually, the principal way that you're going to engage in spiritual warfare is by eradicating all vices from your life and building virtue. Overcome your spiritual defects, etc. And also you have to build a certain prayer life, which is all part of the virtue of justice. And so as you begin to do that, the demon's ability to influence you begins to wane. You see, we got this idea that demons are becoming more powerful. Demons do not increase in power. The power of their wills is fixed. Where they're at in the hierarchy of angels depends on their nature. So how much of, St. Thomas says, the degree of their spiritual substance determines the degree of their intellect. So the more intelligent an angel is, the higher he is. And he says their wills are proportionate to their intellects. So that means that Satan is on the top as far as those who afflict us, as far as the power of his will. In hell, there's a profound pecking order. They know, they never argue with a higher demon because they know he can just force them to do something by the power of his will, and so they're just like, well, I'll just do it. Right? Doesn't mean they don't hide certain things. Doesn't mean they don't try and set each other up to take a shellacking once in a while. It just means that they know that there's this proper pecking order. Part of it, also the natural law is in demons, is that God is to be obeyed. They only got one chance to disobey him. After that, they can never disobey him. Never. This is a very important point. They can disobey the exorcists and us to some degree, but that's only because God allows it in order to build up our strength and our virtue in relationship and our authority in relationship to them. But in session, you command a demon to do stuff. It takes a little while to get them to do it. They'll do it. There's always some degree of compliance. But there's 6 stages of liberation. When you get right towards the end of the 6th stage, he does every single thing the exorcist tells him. He actually pays attention to the exorcist, waiting for the command so he can just get it done and get it out, right? But when it comes to God, if he tells them, because that comes up once in a while in session, all of a sudden he'll tell you something, and that's an indicator that God has told them, you have to tell them. And they'll sell it. Yeah, he told me I had to tell you. They immediately comply. Immediate. And the reason being is because the authority structure that God infused in their mind, this authority structure is part of the natural law, and God infused that in their minds. And that means they know the exact lines of delineation of who has authority and who doesn't. Who has authority over what and who doesn't. They know those exact lines of demarcation, both in relationship to themselves, but also in relationship to us. This is one of the principal reasons why he went after Eve. So what he did is he went after Eve, and this is what happened. The fathers of the church say that when Adam was created, God told him directly, so Adam was talking to God, and God told him directly, do not eat of the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden. So God gave that precept to Adam. Then when Eve was created, because St. Thomas says, and the entire moral tradition says, she was created into a state of subordination, which means she's under him, and I'll return to that here in a minute. She's under him. And so as a result of that, by the natural law, Adam was the one who told Eve, don't eat of the fruit. Okay. So what happens is when she eats the fruit, she steps out from underneath a twofold authority structure, one out from underneath God, and then one from out from underneath her husband. The two principal functions of authority is to provide and to protect. She was now spiritually unprotected. This is exactly what the demons were trying to do, to get people to step outside, out from underneath the authority structure so that they could attack them. So St. Thomas says the hallmark of being in the state of subordination prior to the fall is that women, that Adam loved her, he was solicitous of her, he took care of her, he listened to her, he actually paid attention to her, which, women like, wow, that sounds wonderful. All right. And then after the fall, she entered into a state of subjection, which meant Adam stopped loving her, which is why St. Paul says you have to love your wives. He stopped listening to her, he didn't take her good into consideration, etc. But he said then in heaven, he said, women are neither in a state of subordination nor subjection because some women rule in heaven. So I tell women, okay, look you cannot become holy because the curse of Eve is this desire to control. I'm not going to go into that because that's a whole conference in itself. But in the Hebrew, when it says in Genesis chapter 2, it says your desire shall be for your husband, the actual Hebrew means the desire to control. And this is called the curse of Eve. It's something that every single woman has to conquer. I've literally only met 5 women my entire life that I thought she's really conquered it. Historically, they said if a woman can conquer the curse of Eve, she can master any virtue. And in that process, she becomes one of the most magnificent creatures to walk the face of the planet. If she doesn't, she becomes one of the most wretched. Interesting. It's either you're going to be magnificent or you're going to be wretched. Okay. So I tell women, I said, okay, look if you can conquer that curse of Eve, and that the way that's conquered is St. Paul said, women be subject to your husband. So you have to be. It's not servitude. It's not slavery. It's not groveling. It's actually in a rightly ordered way. There's a whole series of conferences I give on that. It's in a rightly ordered way. If you do that in the process of conquering the curse of Eve and building virtue, you can become more holy than your husband and then have a higher place in heaven and boss him around for the rest of eternity. So don't go for the short-term payout. Don't try and control him in this life. Become holy and submit to him, and then in the next life you got it made. Okay. But he goes after that, and this the curse of Adam, by the way, is irresponsibility and effeminacy, which we see among men, especially today. All you have to do is look at most millennials and you're like, yeah, I see that. Okay. By the way, I pick on millennials because they're such an easy target, right? Okay. So, there are good millennials, I'm not saying there's not. The point being is that the demons are going to use that. They know the structure of our fall. They know how sin disorders us, and that's why they want to do it. Demons are not becoming more powerful in themselves. What's happening is we're doing two things. By every time we commit a sin, that disorder is their domain, and so we are ceding to them influence in a particular area. So every time we sin, we increase their influence in that area. Their power doesn't change, it just means their ability to exercise it becomes more prevalent. The second part of it is that we, so that's the first part, is just through our sin, that we're giving them strength in relationship to that. But then also the frequency of the sin, how much we're doing it, means that they are basically, because there's so many people sinning, that as a result of that gives us an indicator that because so many people are sinning, they're getting more and more influence in the world. It's pretty obvious. I mean, you don't have to be someone like me who literally, my full-time job is beating up demons. I tell people my full-time job is I torture intelligent creatures. That's my job, right? You don't have to be me to know that things are bad, right? The patterns of behavior. One of the patterns of behavior is when Christ said that Satan was a liar and a murderer from the beginning. I'm not going to go into the murder part, although he did reveal why he was a murderer from the beginning. And when you find it out, you're just like, man, this guy's so evil. But in relationship to the lying, I had him for 3 days, beat the guy senseless for 3 straight days. And he didn't tell me the truth once when it would have been better if he just told me the truth, right? They're so wed to that lie. We're seeing that same kind of pattern in our own politicians, in our own public life, where the lying is so habituated that you wonder if they're even capable of telling the truth sometimes, right? And so this is something that we're actually seeing. It's all about, why do demons lie? To gain power, to manipulate us, to control us. Why did we hear about, COVID for 2 years? To lie to us and to control and to manipulate us. I'm not saying COVID isn't a real thing. I'm just saying what they told us about it was obviously a form of brainwashing. I got a conference on that if you want to listen to that. The point being is that we're starting to see these same powers because these same activities of the demons replicated in human beings. So as the more people become sinful, the more the demons are able to influence this particular life. But the demons also know that God has a cutoff. At a certain point, he's going to say, that's enough. And if for no other reason, because he loves us and he doesn't want us to continue going down this rabbit hole, every time you think that people have reached a bottom, they come up with some other form of a depravity. You're like, how did you come up with that? Right? I mean, there's certain forms of depravity that even the demons say, yeah, that's pretty bad. Even I find it revulsive. There's one high-level prelate in the church that he said about this high-level prelate. He says, oh, yeah, I don't like that guy. I'm like, why not? Even the things he likes doing, I find revulsive. Okay, so this gives you an idea of it. So they've become part. Now, let me give you an example of what we're doing, why we're ceding so much control. Now, if you just think about it, let's just say, for the sake of argument, every human being on the planet only committed one venial sin a day, only one. That means that God is being offended 7 billion times a day. So the next time you get offended, I don't want to hear anything. That's just with venial sin, but we know there's billions of mortal sins being committed every day. God is gravely being offended on a regular basis. And at a certain point, what happens is if you keep committing mortal sin, eventually God just allows the demons in. I always tell people, look, the sin it is the domain of Satan, but it's up to God to determine how much they're able to step across the threshold. So every mortal sin, any form of mortal sin whatsoever, which I've seen people become possessed through sins of pride, fornication, pornography, you name it. Any mortal sin is an open door to possession. In fact, mortal sin, the proper effect of mortal sin is possession. Because you've taken yourself out from underneath the authority structure of God, because he has specific laws, and you place yourself under Satan by that process of committing mortal sin. Now, you might open the door, but it's up to God to determine whether the demons are allowed to step over the threshold, and most of the time he blocks that. But it also tells us something very important. Because disorder of any form, whether it's physical or natural or moral or spiritual, is the domain of the demons, it means that it doesn't matter if you think something's morally sinful or not. It's still the proper effect. What does that mean? Well, you see, with sin, there's two kinds of effects. There's the subjective effect, so when you commit a sin, it's in the will, and so your will becomes weakened, etc. But then there's objective effects of sin. So one time I was watching this, I don't even know why I was watching this thing, but I'm watching this young girl, she's 15, she's online, and she's crying, and she's pregnant, and she says, I don't know how this happened. And I'm like, okay, I can't help you. Right? The point being is that becoming pregnant is a possible objective effect of the sin of fornication, whether you think it's morally sinful or not, doesn't matter. You know, if you don't think you can become pregnant, it doesn't matter. You can have objective effects of sin. Well, one of the objective effects of sins, of mortal sin, is demons' involvement in our lives. So it doesn't matter if you don't think it's morally sinful. It doesn't matter if you didn't intend. You can open up the door and to demons' involvement in your life. Now, if you think of what that means, but if you volitionally do it and you know it is morally sinful, that's even worse. So this is one of the things that we're actually seeing, is the fact that it's becoming so bad that demons are just mopping us up. One of the things that demons do, because they have access to the imagination, they also have access to our emotions. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit of thing about human psychology and how demons are influencing this, and this will give us a sense of how much power they have today. So, the way human beings are structured, we have five senses, and we come into contact with reality through our five senses, and it comes in through the brain. It's called the common sense power in Thomistic language, but it's a part of the back of the brain, and it unifies our five senses and expresses that experience, that sense experience, into our imagination in the form of an image, right? So we know this. You can watch me and close my eyes, and then you can still maintain that image of me in your mind. That's how we know that that works. And then there's a power called the cogitative power, and what it does is it goes back into memory. It looks at this image, and then it goes back into memory, compares your past experience with it, and then it merges that information with that image, and then that gives us a fuller understanding of something. How do we know that this is going on? It's called Alzheimer's. So the Alzheimer's patient, he sees the person, it might be his wife, so his wife walks in. Normally, his cogitative power would go back and bring out, this is your wife, and he would immediately recognize that's his wife. But because the cogitative power can't access the memories because of the plaque buildup on neurons, although they have a new theory now about what could be causing that, it doesn't merge that information, and then he doesn't recognize the individual. Okay, so that's what's going on. This cogitative power also has the ability to make an assessment about whether something is good or bad purely on a physical level. It's normally related to pleasure and pain. But this assessment basically puts a perspective on it. Why is that so important? Well, there's two reasons. One is the perspective that you have on your image determines which emotion you have in relationship to that image. So each emotion has a very specific, the emotions are watching, and then once that particular perspective comes on the image, they're moved. I'll give you an example. When a guy first gets married, his wife, he's like, she's so beautiful, look at her, she's just so wonderful, she's so nice, she's so kind, she has a wonderful personality, she actually gets my beer when I'm laying on the sofa, you know, so he goes through this whole thing. 10 years later, and lots of memories, the cogitative power goes back, brings up the information. When she walks in the door, it puts a negative assessment on it, and he experiences sorrow, and he's just like the old battle axe. She hasn't changed. Your perspective on her has changed. This is important because we can choose what perspective that we have and therefore determine our emotional life. Why is this important? Because demons can put that perspective on the images in your imagination. They can manipulate and control you emotionally by the perspective that they put on that. This is one of the reasons why they spend enormous amounts of time getting you to follow your emotions. Because if they can get you to follow your emotions, all they have to do is move your emotions by putting this perspective on, and then they can control you. That's exactly what has happened in our culture for 50 straight years. They've been training us, they've been habituating us to follow our emotions. You can't watch 5 minutes of the news media without there being some bleeding heart story to get you, oh, and the next one's, oh, because you're afraid, and the next one is, it's just a constant stream of emotions. And they're getting people to follow that. They even tell, well, if you don't follow your emotions, you're just heartless. No, I'm a human being. Okay, and so that habituation that we're seeing actually going on is how they manipulate and control us. So that's the same with things that demons actually do, but as our culture becomes more and more like that, it means the demons become more empowered because following your emotions over reason is disordered. And they're going to use that, and so they're going to drive human beings to foster that mentality and that mindset to get people to follow their emotions in relationship to this. I'll give you a perfect example, gay marriage. 15 years ago, I stood in front of 40 Catholic psychologists because I'd written this book in psychology from a Thomistic point of view. And I said, what constitutes mental health is not what everybody's doing, because then sin would be mentally healthy, right? Which it's not. And I said, what constitutes mental health is that your mind functions the way God structured it and designed it according to the natural law. And that means that our structure of our mind is to put us into contact with reality. Now, one of the things that emotions do is it causes what's called contraction. When you have a strong emotion, you lose contact with the reality of what's going on, and your focus becomes internally. We all know this. We've all experienced this. Like when we get angry with somebody or something really hurtful happens, we tend to focus on our interior pain rather than on focusing on, and you know this in marriage, right? Your spouse says something that's hurtful, what do? You focus on the pain rather than what would be the best thing for this person spiritually, for my spouse spiritually. Virtually nobody does that, right? So it causes this contraction. That means it divorces you from your contact with reality. So the more people follow their emotions, the more they become disconnected from reality, right? The point being is that the more we get divorced from reality, the more we follow our emotions, the more we get disconnected from the natural law and the way it functions, the more demons have control and influence over our society. We're seeing it right now, right? I mentioned it in relationship to transitioning from one gender to another. St. Thomas says that can only happen when reason breaks down, when people no longer have use of reason. It's also the same thing in relationship to the LGBT. All that stuff is all connected to the fact that the natural law in the minds of people has become, the technical word is occluded. St. Thomas says our inability to grasp the inclinations of the natural law is either the result of sin or bad formation, intellectual formation. What do you think the last 30 years has happened in our public school systems? That's what we've seen. It's bad formation. Sally has 2 mothers. What do you think of that, Johnny? Now, if Johnny had full formation, he would say, there's something wrong mentally with those people. Which, by the way, in transgender operations, before they were doing those, they started, if you actually watch the history of it, they started doing those in the 80s, but they even called it simulation. They knew they weren't changing these people's gender. And what happened is when they got to the point, they basically began to see the same pattern, which we now, 80% regret after they've gone through the thing, high rates of suicide, high rates of depression, etc., from the people who've gone through this, and they realized this isn't helping people, so they stopped. It wasn't until about 15, 20 years ago that the money came in and they made big money. A transgender operation somewhere between 100 and 200 grand. They're making big money off of this, and that's what's driving it. Okay, so the point being is that the more we become disordered, the more demons can drive this stuff, and then the harder it becomes for the rest of us to actually follow the natural law, that is to follow the moral teachings of the church and to do what we know is right and to build virtue. On the other hand, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more, so that the more sinful things become, the more we are capable of getting grace from God if we're faithful, and the more faithful we are to the graces, the more He's going to give us, and the more holy that we can become. So how do you keep yourself protected in the context of all this? Well, obviously, the first thing is always stay in the state of grace. Never commit mortal sin whatsoever. That's been one of my themes here. Always stay in the state of grace. Get to confession on a regular basis. Receive the sacraments. Go to Mass on Sunday days and holy days, not just Sundays, holy days. Making sure your marriages are straightened out, all of that. You have to also make sure that you're praying on a regular basis. One of the things that we discovered, it took us a while. I've been doing solemn exorcisms for about 16 to 17 years. And my lay assistant who does my initial vetting, my nickname for him is the curmudgeon. And the reason I call him that is because he's a curmudgeon. But he's just exactly the type of guy you want in this, because there's always people that are trying to they just want to see me. They don't need my help, right? So he's very good at weeding these people out. But anyway, he's been helping exorcists for almost 25 years. And so we sat down one time, and there's a long story behind it. But what we basically did is we started this thing where we started putting people on a prayer prescription, which is saying the Angelus 6, noon, and 6, and the prayers of the Auxilium Christianorum. You can look that up online. There's an app for it. The prayers of the Auxilium Christianorum at that same time, 6, noon, and 6. And what we started to notice is that the diabolic influence in people's lives began to wane significantly. We even saw people self-liberate from possession by doing this every single day. It took them about 6 months, but they did it. And what we began to realize is that in watching the patterns, because he and I just sit and watch patterns, right? He's a lawyer, but he actually used to do ranching, and so we sit and watch patterns, right? And I, from the very beginning, as soon as I started working with demons, because I'd written books in psychology, I was watching the patterns, so I could separate out, okay, this is psychological patterns that are proper to a demon, this is human being, and this is what it looks like when they're mixed. And one of the patterns that we started to notice is that when people do that on a regular basis, the demons were basically vacating, or it kept people immune from diabolic attack. Well, two things started to emerge. The first is that exorcists are starting to notice that most liberations are now revolving, not all, but most liberations of people who are possessed are revolving around two areas of Catholic doctrine, either the incarnation or the passion, specifically the precious blood. And so we started noticing that a lot of people were being liberated because it had something to do with one of those, the connection to one of those two doctrines. The second thing that we started to notice was, it was the same reason why exorcists used to say that the way you break diabolic oppression, which is attack from the outside, is by just increasing your prayer life, and over the course of time it would just slowly taper off. But what we started to notice is that the common element in people who are diabolically obsessed, people who are being attacked through oppression, even people who are possessed, was an elementary lack of discipline in their prayer life or spiritual life. Elementary. I don't care if you're saying the rosary every day. That's not what I'm talking about. You should. You need to be saying the rosary every day. But we're talking about something that requires a consistent self-denial day after day. Getting up at 6 and saying the Angelus at 6 and doing the prayers of the Auxilium Christianorum. Can't tell how many people, well, can I get up at 7? No, it has to be at 6. It's that discipline of maintaining that on a regular basis is what actually breaks the diabolic hold over them, and they stop attacking the people. So it's this elementary lack of discipline in people's spiritual life. So if you want protection, you have to start developing a consistent prayer life, but you also need to be engaging in forms of mortification where it's consistent. It requires daily self-denial. It doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be something in which you're doing that on a consistent basis. This is something which we do even in our own community, right? Because our community, which does exorcism, we pray 3 to 4 hours a day, 3 to 4 hours. And that's what keeps us largely immune. The other thing is, too, is when we're in solemn session, we're fasting 6 days a week on 1 meal a day. We do it consistently, and that's what keeps us protected. We know it's not us. We know it's God who's honoring our sacrifice for that. But it's that consistent discipline that keeps people immune. The other thing is, too, again, you can say the prayers of the Auxilium Christianorum. It's a group that was started by 2 exorcists. We think there's about 400,000 people worldwide saying the prayers, and it's actually a group. It doesn't take long to say the prayers, 5 to 7 minutes a day. If you say it every day, everybody that's a member, and all you have to do to become a member is say the prayers, everybody who's a member is praying for everybody else who's in the group. And so as a result, you're literally plugging into the prayers of 400,000 people for your spiritual protection, for you and your family. The other thing is, too, is we've seen people liberated from possession just saying those prayers. It's a phenomenal diagnostic tool. One time this one family was having problems with their daughter, and I said, well, here, start saying the prayers of the Auxilium Christianorum. From the time they started saying those prayers to the time they stopped, the daughter would scream uncontrollably. She didn't even know they were praying them. So this is an indicator that the demons, they don't like these things, right? So that's always a good sign. Developing virtue, making sure you eradicate any vice or any defect. You have to know the mechanics of the spiritual life. You actually have to also know the Catholic faith. We are not living in a time where you can be ignorant of your Catholic faith. If you are, you will get mopped up. Not just by what's going on in a culture, but by the demons themselves. Every single individual that we deal with that is possessed has some failure of understanding in some point of Catholic doctrine. Every single one of them. We are also finding that a vast majority of the people that show up on our doorstep don't even understand the basic catechism of the Catholic Church. They don't understand even the basics. We are not living in a time in which you can do this, especially as priests and bishops get weirder and weirder. Fortunately, you got good priests here. But as they get weirder and weirder and weirder, which is happening, you just watch it. It's like a daily score. You can sit back, get the popcorn, and see which bishop said what nutty thing, right? The fact is that you have to know your faith. Because if you don't know your faith, you're likely to do something that's going to cause you harm spiritually. And so this is something that the demons are going to do. The other part about it is demons attack vocation, which means they're always going to attack marriage. How do they attack the marriage? Remember this perspective on the image? The first thing they do is put a perspective on the image of one spouse to another in order to psychologically divide them. If you feel you're psychologically divided from your spouse, you've already been mopped up. They've won to some degree, and you're going to have to fight that. You're going to have to start looking at your spouse different, right? And I tell women, because one of the aspects of the curse of Eve is that when Eve ate the fruit, she's like, what if he doesn't eat the fruit, right? And then what does he do? What's the first thing Adam does when God says, why'd you do this? He threw her under the bus. So as a result, women, part of the curse of Eve is they think their husband, and I tell women this, yes, we all know, your husband is the dumbest guy that walks the face of the planet. We all know that. We know your husband's dumb. We all know that. That's what they have to fight and deal with, right? By the way, your husband might be dumb, but the point being is that, and two, sometimes the wife will say, "What do you think?" I get it, okay. But it's also the same thing in relationship to the wife. I mean, the guys can, she just talks constantly. Right? They did brain studies. They found out, just to lighten us a little bit before I finish up and then we go to Q&A. When they did brain studies, they found out that women get 10 times the amount of pleasure drug in their brains when they talk than men do. All you have to do is look at it. The guy's sitting there, and the wife's like, no. All right. But I tell people that's actually a perfection. It's just immoderated. Here's why. They discovered this boy in the woods it was in the 1920s, I think it was. There was a boy who was about 10 years old running in the woods of Germany. He was naked running around. He was running so fast he could actually keep up with the deer, and they actually think that the wolves were the ones that nurtured this kid to the point where he was running around, right? Well, they captured the kid, and he knew zero language. So they tried to teach him a language, but what they found out is that he could never master definite articles. or indefinite articles. You just couldn't, like us and thus, you just couldn't get them. And philologists for the longest time said, well, they just must not have trained him right. So then what happened is, this was in the 1980s, they found a girl who was 12 years old. Her parents thought she was retarded, and so they had locked her in this room and fed her, and they never talked to her, never let her out, never let anything, and so she literally knew no language. So then they tried to teach her, same problem. She could not master definite articles. You actually see this with people in certain Asian languages where there aren't definite articles. When they start learning English, they have a very hard time mastering definite articles and indefinite articles, but also number, right, in relationship to certain things. And so then they started doing brain studies, and what they found out is, first of all, I'm sure you've all noticed, especially if you've gone to another country and you're learning a language, that women speak much more clearly than men do, as a general rule, right? What they found out is that in the beginning stages, for the first 5 years of the child's life, the neurons are starting to develop specific pathways. And if the mother specifically doesn't talk to the child on a regular basis, those neurons do not develop the pathways, and it causes literal brain damage. So I tell people, the inclination that God gave to women to talk is a perfection. It's just it's meant for the children and not the husband. Okay, why is all this so important? Is because the demons are going to use even our perfections against us, right? And they're going to attack marriage, they're going to attack your vocation, they're going to attack all sorts of things, and you just have to be, you don't be paranoid. You know, I'm one of those guys that, you know, when I get done beating up a demon, I'll tell you a story that's kind of funny, but I get done beating up this demon, I'm done. I'm ready to go have a cigar and some scotch, right? And this one time, this one demon, it took me a while to figure out what he was doing, but he was causing super vivid dreams at night to me. And it took me a little while to get a handle on it, to stop him from doing that. But in the dreams, he was actually revealing to me his experience of the sessions. And so one of the things that he revealed in one of these dreams was that he was incensed at the fact that during the sessions I would just show up, beat him mercilessly, and then just walk off like nothing happened. Just really annoyed him. Okay. So, that being the case. So to keep yourself protected, the main thing is to do it. If you lead an authentic Catholic life in all of its richness, that means not just Mass, but also using the sacramentals, that the church offers, like the Benedict medal, the scapulars, things like that, using holy water, etc. Living a full Catholic life as it's understood from the tradition coming to us, your odds of becoming extraordinarily diabolic influence are nil. You're going to be tempted, but that's because that's just our lot in life until we die. But so everybody suffers that to some degree or another. Even Christ suffered it, for our sake, of course. Not because he was weak, but quite the contrary. So the point being is that if you're leading an authentic Catholic life, your odds of becoming diabolically influenced are very rare, and you're less likely to suffer extraordinary temptations. One last thing. Remember this point where I was talking about elementary discipline and how it keeps demons away? One of the patterns we just sorted out in the last year that we were watching is that families who have not lost a child, and each child in the family, when they reach the age of majority, continues leading the Catholic faith, they have one thing in common, and that is this elementary discipline. There's a consistency in self-denial in the family on a regular basis. And this means it was, requiring them to pray at certain times, or requiring them to do self-denial, requiring them to do certain things, fasting on a regular basis, requiring the children to do that so that when they come out the other end, the percentage of loss was practically nil. Even families that pray together, a lot of times they would stay together, but we found that undergirding that has to be this elementary discipline that you have to instill in your children. And that's one of the principal ways you will protect them as well. Oh, and last, stay under the authority structure, both in the church, so you have to stay in the church and stay under its authority structure, because that's where one of the primary aspects of authority is, but also you have to follow this traditional Catholic understanding of the family structure and its authority structure within the family. The husband has to be the head of the household. And I'm not saying this because I'm against women. Quite frankly, there's all sorts of women that are holier than their husbands. The issue isn't whether you have power or not. That's demon talk. If you actually look at the feminist movement, it is the curse of Eve on steroids. But if you follow the traditional Catholic understanding of the husband is supposed to love his wife, which means he's going to exercise authority not for his sake but for hers. He'll be sacrificial for her, he'll love her, he'll do what he needs to do in order to what's best for her. Then on the other hand of it, if she submits, then she can stay under that authority structure and she's likely to be protected. It's the same thing with children. We know this. We know that when children step out from underneath the authority structure of their parents, they get hurt. It's the kid who's playing in the yard. You tell the kid, don't go run out into the street. He runs out in the street and he gets run over, right? Because he didn't stay underneath the authority structure. The same thing is true even on a spiritual level. So follow that traditional family structure, do it in a rightly ordered way and a loving way, and then as a result of that, then over the course of time, it will provide that level of protection. Okay. So we're going to stop, and we'll have about 30 minutes of Q&A. So. I'll just take the part. Okay, so I'll answer these until we get to 30 minutes and then we'll kind of cut it off. Part of the reason I cut it off at 30 minutes is because if we don't, we'll be here forever. All right. When an exorcist beats up a demon, what does that mean? Well, in the early church, there was actually part of the rite was you'd slap the demon out of people. We don't do that anymore. Okay. Although there was one time I said that to this woman who was possessed, and she just looked at me with all seriousness, whatever it takes. Right. Okay. So, basically what that means is it primarily means saying the prayers of the church, the ritual, the solemn rite of exorcism. It also means saying other kinds of prayers, making him reverence certain things, making him, applying relics and various other sacred items to the parts of the body that they possess, making them say prayers. Making them admit certain things. And so it's basically getting them to do things that are contrary to the will, which causes them pain. And then as the pain increases, they become weaker, and then they're likely to give you the information that you need. So it's largely about using prayer yourself, but then also making them do prayers or doing certain kinds of prayers, and then they'll do that. Or also just, reverencing relics, things of that sort will cause them. That's what we mean by beating them up. Okay. And it's brutal to them. The experience that a demon has in session is far more extreme than we even see as the exorcist. It's something that took me a while to realize that this guy's in a lot more pain than he's letting on, or that he's even able to manifest. And part of that has to do with the fact that the human body has limitations. And if he was to show the full extent of his pain through the human body, it would literally kill the person. That's how much pain they're in. Will our intellect and will, after we die, work like it does while we're alive? No, it works a little bit differently in the sense that your intellect normally can only understand something when you have something in your imagination, St. Thomas says. And so we no longer have our imagination. So our knowledge in heaven is more like angelic knowledge. And so we understand what's going on, we know certain things, we know what's going on in this world, but it functions more like angelic knowledge. Do demons know what we're thinking? Okay, so there's a few ways in which demons can surmise or know what you're thinking. The first is by divine revelation, which virtually never happens. God reveals to them this is what the person's thinking. The second part is, remember when I said that they watch our psychological patterns, they watch us all our life, and they look at us and they say, and spouses do this with each other, right? Spouses will I know what you're thinking, right? And so it's because they know by the way the person's reacting or the way they're behaving, what they're thinking. It's not an absolute, but so it's the same thing in relationships. So demons can watch our patterns, but they can read our body and have a sense of what's going on. So, for example, when you lie, the temperature around your eyes increases. So that's an example of it. They also know when you lie, there's certain other physiological patterns. So they can kind of tell by your patterns of thinking and what you talk about, they can start seeing your physiological reactions and sometimes make the connection. So that's one of the ways. The other way that they can know what you're thinking is if you tell them. The third way that they, or the fourth way that they can actually know is if they put a thought in your mind and you don't resist it, they know you're thinking it. So that's one of the ways. Can a long-term marriage with an alcoholic husband be in the proper order of authority? Yes, but it's going to take a little bit of work to get him to kind of come up to speed, because the alcoholism is affecting his ability to obviously to govern in a rightly ordered way. And so what she needs to do, though, is start finding certain ways in which she can, there might be, if he's an alcoholic to such a point he can't even function, well, then she's going to just have to assume certain responsibilities, but once he would overcome the alcoholism, then she needs to give them back, which is sometimes difficult. But there's also, sometimes if a guy's a functioning alcoholic, there's certain things you just have to let him exercise his authority in when it's rightly ordered, okay? How does a faithful parent educate their children to be vigilant in their spiritual life without making them feel there's a demon behind everything? It's actually a good question. I think the best way to do it is just teach them to say the prayer of St. Michael, and then when they get a temptation, just say, well, when you get a temptation, you just tell the demon to stop it or what have you. So it's a matter of teaching them based upon their state, how old they are, how much you know that they can process. And so you have to teach it, but by the time someone reaches 18, they should have at least the basic understanding of spiritual warfare, that they attack our imagination, they put thoughts in our minds, they're not always ours. They also, they can move us emotionally, etc. They should have the basics of it, and that they should be saying basic prayers to keep themselves protected. But the big dividing line is that should not be the primary focus of their prayers. Their primary focus of their prayers should be to be worshiping God, being thankful to God, and petitioning Him for things they need, etc. It should be the normal stuff of the spiritual life, and that they just engage the demons when they see them. St. Peter says, be vigilant and watchful, which basically means, if you see them pop up, you whack them down, and then you just keep moving on, right? You don't become focused on them. Don't hyper-focus on them, and don't make them the focus of your life is the main thing. One of the principal ways you keep yourself protected is by ignoring them, except when necessary. If you have to deal with them, then you deal with them. Otherwise, you just ignore them. How accurate was the screw tape letters? Fairly accurate. It's kind of shallow, but it's fairly accurate. How do demons choose who they will possess? Okay, they don't have any choice in the matter. What that basically means is this. There are two types of possession. There are possessions in which God permits them in the sense of, He says, you can possess this individual. And because demons' will is fixed on the evil, it's almost like they're compulsive. They'll just do it because they're gonna choose that path, right? And so they just do it. So God says, well, I'm going to permit you to do this, and so they do it. There's other times He tells them, you must possess this person. Now that sounds strange, but we call that conscription. And basically what it is that God is allowing the possession, or He tells them they have to possess the person because there's something in the person's life or through the possession that he wants the family or the individual to come to knowledge of. So for example, there was a case that I had, it was actually two cases of sisters who were blood related. And they were possessed by some of the same possessors. One had one extra one, but the other ones had other possessors. And the reason it became clear that God basically conscripted them into possession was because of the fact that He wanted a particular generational spirit to be expunged from the family line. Right? And so a lot of times the demons don't have any control over the matter. So one of the cases I'm working on now, one of the demons was a low-level demon. His original name was Eustace, the Just One, and he had a specific relationship with Our Lady, and he had never possessed anybody. And the reason God told him you have to possess this woman is because in her battle to get this thing out, she was going to reach a level of holiness which would be identical to his level in heaven. She was going to get his place in heaven, not his relationship with Our Lady, but his place in heaven. So he uses them as instruments. They'll admit as much. They'll admit they're slaves of Christ, just unwilling. So they don't get to choose anything, right? Why does God let demons do what they do? It's for our sanctification, ultimately. Okay. Have you been personally attacked by Satan during an exorcism? No, not really. I mean, okay. It depends on what you mean by attacked. If you mean by an extraordinary way, no. But there has been a couple of times during sessions where the demon would attack me internally, and so I had an experience of what the person who was possessed, what kind of a psychological attack that they were undergoing. Now, demons do not like to attack an experienced exorcist, and there's a reason behind that. Being an exorcist is like stepping into a boxing ring. Now, if you've ever talked to a boxer, an authentic boxer, they'll say you'll never really know a guy. You can watch all the tapes until the cows come home, but it's not until you're in the actual ring with him that you get a sense of what his actual technique and method is, right? And so that means that when you're in the boxing ring, he reveals his methodology to you. It's the same thing in spiritual warfare. When the demon attacks an experienced exorcist, he can break it very rapidly, but then he can stand back and reflect on his experience and get a sense of what the attack is. And then the next time in session, he can go after him and cause the demon a lot of damage. And so they don't like to. So once in a while, I do get attacked, but not that often. There's also a general principle, is not that I like being attacked, I don't. But if I am attacked, my attitude is, at least I can keep an eye on him. Because with demons, when they're attacking you, you can watch him. Okay, there he is. We know I'm keeping an eye on you. I'm watching you. It's when they don't attack you, you have to worry. Because that means you're about to get broadsided. And so that's one of the reasons why I ask Our Lady on a regular basis, watch my flank. Right? Because I can't teach, I'm a limited human being. Okay. So there was one time, one demon jumped up and it was kind of like judo for like 30 seconds where he was trying to hit me. But I've been whacked a couple of times, got decked right in the face once. But that was, this was one of those things where, hey, it's got to, I mean, literally, all of a sudden it just goes wham like that, and it just nailed me right in the eye, right perfectly. And I'm like, okay, all right. But one of the things we do is in the beginning of sessions, we do a series of prayer that clamp down on them. And I'm also a firm believer in punishing bad behavior. So when he does something like that, he pays a price. And to the point where he regrets it. That's the goal. Okay. Are severe anxiety and or panic attacks related to a demon or a spiritual root? Yeah, they can be, not always. There are psychological conditions that a person can reach where that is in place. However, demons can also cause that. If not, how does one discern whether there is a biological or spiritual origin? It has to do with the specific psychological patterns. And so basically, if it's, for example, if it's diabolic, if it's psychological obsession, psychological or mental illnesses are basically the result, unless it has an organic cause, like there's something wrong with the brain, which can happen. But by the way, not every mental illness is the result of chemical imbalance. There's a book called The Chemical Myth, which is a very good book and talks about how the pharmaceutical companies actually knew in the 1980s, shortly after they had derived most of the psychotropic drugs, that they actually didn't work. Right? They knew that. But there's billions of dollars a year in them. Okay. So, and there's a whole set of brain science stuff behind that, which, if it was a different lecture, I'd be happy to go into. But there's some stuff online that you can read about that. But there are certain things that are actually from a psychological cause, and a psychological mental illness is the result of rumination, so it's a habit that's built into the individual, so it's very consistent, and it responds to external stimulus. So for example, you know, if some guy says, I think my wife's nuts, and you're like, well, why do you say that? Well, all I have to do is just look at her cross-eyed and she goes ballistic. Well, maybe there's a reason for that, but the point being is that it's going to respond to specific things externally, right? So it's consistent and it responds to things that are external. Whereas diabolic obsession doesn't follow that pattern at all. Now they are opportunists, so they might use external stimuli, but not always. But the pattern is it'll switch on and then it'll just switch off. And there's nothing that's causing the thing to switch on, and there's nothing to cause it to switch off. Priests see this pattern regularly in confession. The pattern, I'll just describe it, and any priest will say, yes, I've seen that pattern. Usually it's a young man in his 20s. He comes in, he's struggling against chastity, he's struggling to maintain chastity, and he falls. He'll go to confession, it feels like it lifts, like the temptations are gone, they'll be gone for a day or two, and then over the course of the next couple of days, the temptations set in really strong, and then he falls, and he goes to confession, and then it lifts again. So that pattern like this is diabolic obsession, okay? And so there's things that can blow that actually out. But that's one of the patterns that you actually tend to see. So one of the things, as I mentioned, I've been doing this for 17 years and haven't written a book on psychology before I did this. I've been watching diabolic patterns, and I was able to sort out all the patterns. Those patterns are in the priest version of the book. They're not in the lay version of the book because of what we call the CSI effect. We don't want people reading how possessed people behave or the patterns that we see and then coming to us and acting it out, and because it becomes harder to discern. So okay, so but the other way is that if it's from a spiritual origin, it will respond to prayer, your own prayer. You say a binding prayer, or you start doing this discipline like I mentioned, 6, noon, and 6. You start doing that, you're going to start seeing it lift slowly, and that gives you an indicator that it's actually not psychological, that it's actually spiritual. Does the devil influence all sin? No, there's times we just choose stuff because we're being bad. This is an important point because sometimes, even exorcists, especially when they're first starting, they'll say, she was manifesting. Well, what do you mean? Well, she was acting badly. Well, not acting badly is not always a manifestation of a demon. We can act badly on our own. All right. How much does free will play when it comes to choosing sin? Well, sin is entirely in the will. And so the degree of the sin is directly proportional to how free it is. Okay. One time in this church, there was a guy. He was an 80-year-old man. He was sitting in the back of the church and his phone rang. And unlike this fine young man who shut it off, he stands up in the back of the church and says, I can't talk to you. I'm at Mass. Okay. What are the 9 levels of prayer? Well, you can actually, that's a whole conference on its own. I actually have a conference online called the 9 levels of prayer. Do guardian angels protect against possession or assist during exorcisms? And the answer is actually yes. How much an angel is allowed to influence your life and to protect you is proportionate to 2 things. The first is what God commands and intends. So a lot of times they'll just protect you from being stupid and the effects of being stupid because God says you got to protect this individual. There's other times though when the demons will have to stand back because God says you got to let them tempt them. Angels, any angel can basically, it's called prelation. Any angel, good angel, can command any demon to leave, right? With Our Lady, she's also, we say that actually technically all the saints in heaven have perfect coercive power over demons. But the difference between her and Christ is obviously Christ has it by nature because he's God, whereas with those in heaven, it's by God acting through them as instruments. But Our Lady's a little bit different. We say she has perfect coercive power over demons because of the fact that God lets her exercise it far more frequently than he allows the other angels to do, or the other saints. But the angels, so they can do it. In exorcisms, sometimes the angels will protect people. Sometimes they'll act upon the individual who's possessed, even during the manifestations, in order to protect them from certain things, maybe even psychologically. They can preserve people's psychological faculties. There has been once where one of the people who was possessed actually saw the guardian angel of my priesthood. I don't know if I mentioned this online. So when you're ordained, you get another angel, usually from that hierarchy of archangels, right? And of the people that I know that have had authentic visions, not people just saying, but I see angels. Well, God bless you. But the
people who possess...
So I've actually seen other people's guardian angels, but also there's a young boy who I'm aware of who's 10 years old, and he can see angels. He can see them. And his description is flawless. And it lines out with what we know, how the descriptions that saints and stuff have given of them. But anyway, your guardian angel, they say, looks just like you. And the reason being is because his assigned task was to protect you. Now think about that. God created an angel whose nature was about you. And that means that when he decided to accept his assigned task, his first act, his first choice was to love you, to be willing to protect you. Obviously, he's doing it under the aspect of serving God's will. But that's it. So that's why they say they actually look like them. They say, whereas all the people that have seen the guardian angels of people's priesthood, they say they're huge, large. So what happened is this woman who was possessed, she calls me, and I tell people I kind of want to hear from you in between sessions unless it's something I really need to hear. Well, she calls and she says, I'm pinned to the floor. And because the demons would pin her from time to time, so she hands the phone to the assistants who are assisting me during the sessions, and the assistant said, yeah, we can't budge her, we can't move her at all, they're just pinned. And I'm literally handing the woman at the gate getting on an airplane my ticket. I'm like, well, I can't do anything right now. The flight's only an hour long. I'll call you when it's done. So we get through, I get on the other end, I get off the plane, I get to a part of the airport where people can't hear me, so I call her back and I say, are you still pinned? She says, yes. So I said a simple binding prayer, bound the demon, and all of a sudden I just hear her say, I gotta go. She just hangs up. 5 minutes later, she calls back and said, well, he let up, and I hadn't been to the bathroom in 5 hours, so I had to go to the bathroom. I'm like, fair enough. Before I got on the plane, though, I didn't tell her this. Before I got on the plane, after I hung up with her, I said to the guardian angel, my priesthood, go help her. What happened is right at that moment, my guardian angel came and appeared to her and held her hand during the whole time until she was freed. So that gives you a sense of it, right? And she says, he's huge, right? So people say, how come you get such a big demon? And I say, because I'm a little guy. I need more protection. Okay. Best advice for engaged couples. Don't do it. Don't do it. No, okay. The best advice is, if you can, there is a conference that I did called the 4 Stages of Courtship. It's the structure that was laid out and it was followed prior to the collapse in Catholic countries of how courtship was to be done. And everybody who has gone through that process says that when they get married, they already have the virtues of self-denial in relationship to each other, where marriage is much better and smoother. So that's one of the things. The other thing is, too, is you have to start learning to pray together and start working on defects. You also have to be brutally honest with yourself, right? And recognizing that your spouse has issues, right? As they say, while you're dating or courting, that's the best that person's ever going to be. Right? Okay. If there's a demon of homosexuality, and how are they repulsed by these acts? Because they have a natural law too. Their natural law inclines them towards stuff that's orderly, even though they choose contrary to it. So when they see that stuff, they feel the same revulsion of the natural law that we do. Okay. But that doesn't mean that they don't inspire it, because they want to inspire it. It's more a kind of a case with them. They're just kind of like, okay, let's get this guy to do this, right? Okay. Can you please explain what this would look like, that we should be careful not to pray binding prayers superstitiously? Basically what that means is that binding prayers are like any other prayer. They're based upon the merit and the authority that the person has in relationship to it. So authority is, like parents can say binding prayers against demons in relationship to their family. Now, the way it works is that prayer begets what it signifies. So if there is something diabolic and you say the prayers, you're going to see some type of reaction. It doesn't mean that every time you see something you say a binding prayer. I mean, sometimes you just have to take an authentic look at it and assess, is this thing honestly spiritual or not? Okay, because sometimes it's not spiritual. Sometimes it's just your kid is acting bad, right? Because sometimes people bring me these. It's always the kid's like. It's always a boy. He's 10 years old, and it's a mother, and she's bringing the kid. And she says, "I think the kid's possessed. The kid is acting out of control." So then I'll just look at her and says, "When was the last time you spanked him?" "Oh, Father, I don't believe in that." And I said, "There's why. That's the story." Okay. So. Anyway, that being said, okay, so how did I get off on that? Oh yeah, okay. So what you have to do is you just have to use them like anything else. If you see the change, then you maintain them. If not, then you just move on to something else and you just have to pray. So, okay, superstitiously would mean that you just, I say the prayer and this is what I get, and it's not exactly, it doesn't exactly work that way. Do guardian angels move on to protect a new person after the death of the person that they were guarding? No. The entire reason for the guardian angel's existence was to protect you and then to see God after that, and that's it. Which is kind of cool, right? So, I did time once apologize to my guardian angel. "Look, I'm really sorry you got stuck with me," but okay. What are the requirements to become an exorcist? The church has several of them. He should be someone of older age. He should normally be older. He should be, and by that they mean that he should be a priest for a while. There should be a certain amount of time he's a priest because you have to be grounded. See, the Society of Priests that we have, which we only do exorcism work, and you can't even apply to be a member of our society until you've been ordained for at least 5 years. Usually we like to see 10, and all the people that are with us now have been priests for 10 years at least. Part of that's because you have to be grounded because there is a lot of interior battles that actually occur. The demons do attack you, as I mentioned before, and it can be the first 2 years as an exorcist is a meat grinder interiorly. You're getting attacked and it's just brutal, right? And then after a while you start getting better at it and you just realize it and you beat up the demons more, and like anything else they want to leave you alone because they've gotten their nose bloodied a few times and they don't like you anymore than you like them, okay? In fact, they hate you. I was telling the people at the lunch this afternoon one time, this one demon said to me, he says, "I hate your guts." And I said, "No, you don't hate me, you hate him," referring to God. And he says, "Oh, I hate him, but I hate you too." I'm like, yeah. All right. Okay. So you should be of a certain age, you should have a certain level of piety, which basically means that you need to be someone who understands that you need to be under the authority of your bishop. You have a devotion to the office of your bishop. Doesn't mean your bishop's perfect. You should also have a certain level of spiritual life that needs to be placed. You need to be knowledgeable. This is the one problem we have. People ask me, how many are the exorcists there are in the country? About 130, but only about 20 know what they're doing. And a lot of it's because they just don't have proper theological backgrounds, or they just haven't had the proper training, or their training was bad. So what training is required? So I used to teach at the Leo XIII Institute, which is actually a place where it was started more or less by the bishops. The bishops asked it to be started. And so I taught there for a number of years, but then I stopped teaching because what was happening was it's a 2-year program, and most bishops are like, "I can't wait 2 years, I need somebody now." So then our society started a program where you come, it's a 1-week intensive academic course. It's 8 hours straight per day, crushing everything you need to know in order to be able to understand how demons work. And then we invite people to come in and sit in on session so that they actually can see this is the flow of the session, this is how the demons have to be behaved and how they have to behave and how you have to handle them, what to do, what not to do on a practical level, because demons act within a specific gamut and you need to know what those are, but when they act within that, you need to know how to react in relationship to them, Okay. How can you tell the difference between someone who needs an exorcism and someone who has a mental health issue? As I mentioned, there's very distinctive patterns. I just spent last weekend talking to psychologists about those patterns and the differences in those patterns. So, as I mentioned, I kind of gave the example of diabolic obsession. With possession, they still show the same patterns as obsession, but there's also certain things that actually happen, which there's things that are going to occur that cannot be explained psychologically. So you might have heard there's a bishop in Switzerland who's done away with exorcists and says, we don't know this, it's all psychological. And so people say, well, what do you think? And I said, well, you know, if I'm in session and some guy levitates and sticks to the ceiling, that's not a psychological problem. People changing shape, women turning into figures of men or animals, that's not a psychological problem, right? Somebody telling me or speaking a language they never knew. The first case of possession I had, this guy spoke a form of Phoenician that has been defunct for 3,500 years. He didn't even finish high school. So that's not normal, right? That's not a psychological problem. Okay, so that's one of the ways that you can tell. This is going to be the, okay, actually, just want to get one last question. The person's probably going to think, oh, he picks mine, okay. Can you explain how demons are controlling the government? Ooh. Okay. Some of these are, I kind of answered these online, but they're really long questions. So what are the things that we can do to protect ourselves and our family? I already mentioned this. One of the things is to start developing devotions on a regular basis. But as I mentioned, prayer on a regular basis. Developing the discipline in the family. Okay, every week, we're going Wednesdays and Fridays, we're going to fast. It doesn't have to be extreme, but there should be some, it should be something that is, you know, a little taxing, a little difficult. If the bad angels were condemned for one bad decision, what hope do we have, and why is God so patient with us? Well, the reason he's patient with us is because we're stupid. Right? I mean, we are. That's why, I mean, basically, so mercy, God's mercy is not unconditional. If you've heard that, that is absolutely false. God's mercy has, you get God's mercy from one of two reasons. One, because of contrition, you're contrite. And why is that? Because in contrition, you're looking at your sin and you're intellectually, you've been corrected. Because when we choose a sin, we choose it under the aspect of the good and we think it's good. But when we're contrite, we recognize, no, that was bad. So there's that correction of us intellectually. And then we desire to change. And so God cuts us mercy. So God gives mercy to the contrite. It's right in Scripture. The other one is to the stupid, right? Well, you just didn't know better. Right? But we have to be careful even with that because of the fact, so those are the two people that get God's mercy. So there's some people that God just cuts slack because of the fact that they're just, you know, they just didn't know any better. However, you have to be really careful with that because sometimes people say, oh, well, these people just don't know any better. Well, that's true. Sometimes it is true. Some people have psychological conditions or sometimes they just don't know. They never were taught that these things were bad. You see that in relationship to modesty. Most women have no clue what modesty is, and it's just because they just don't know, right? So that being the case, but on the other hand, St. Thomas says that there's certain inclinations of the natural law for which there is no excuse. And if you commit the sin, you can't feign ignorance. Now, if you've lost use of reason, or there's been some type of malformation in your life to where you're not capable intellectually to grasp these things because of psychological reasons, well, he's going to cut you some slack. But as long as you have use of reason, St. Thomas says there's no excuse. The example he gives is that fornication is mortally sinful. Now think of that. How do we know this is true? You talk to couples that have been shacking up. So 98% of couples shack up now. Catholics are 97%, so we're not much better. So 98%. If you talk to them and you say, you know, you really should get your relationship straightened out, every one of them will say, yeah, that's true. They know, all right? So, okay. So the moral of the story is that contrition for human beings is because we're stupid, and this is why Eve said, I was deceived, right? So, and that's why, because she didn't fully understand, and that's why God cuts us slack. But the demons were not deceived. They fully knew what they were doing, and that's why their one choice was fix them permanently. Whereas with us, as I mentioned, because we're not that bright, it takes us a while to kind of fully form ourselves and get our wills fixed in the good or evil. Okay, I'll give you a blessing. Benedictio Dei omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, super vos sit manet semper. Amen. God bless and have a good night.
Thank you all. Be safe driving home.